Alright, so most of you are probably familiar with what a constellation is, especially constellations such as the Big Dipper or the Little Dipper. I'm sure you've heard of them before, so you should have some background information on them. But the official definition of a constellation is patterns in stars observed by ancient Greeks and Romans. The constellation stories and the images arose out of Greek and Romans. They were huge storytellers. They loved to create stories, and they also were into all of the mythology. So they had constellations that kind of backed up their stories. In the sky, they obviously appear pretty close together. That's how we're able to group them into pictures, the Greeks and Romans were, but in reality, they're really very far apart. And the shapes you see depend on your point of view. For instance, some constellations you can only see during some times of the year. Orion, for example, is a winter constellation. I would think some of you are familiar with Orion. It's where you can see the 3 stars in a row that are his belt, and then you can see his bow and arrow. That's a constellation that you only see in the winter. So it depends on your point of view as to where the Earth is in reference to the sun. Modern constellations, we still kind of talk about constellations, even though the ancient Greeks and Romans and their stories are kind of gone. Well, not gone, but they aren't still making stories up about the stars. So today, modern astronomy divides the sky into 88 constellations. And there's some examples. I'm going to further divide them into circumpolar constellations and then seasonal constellations. Circumpolar constellations are constellations that circle around Polaris, which is another name for the North Star. As you know from math, circum typically refers to the circumference or something to do with a circle. So when we refer to circumpolar constellations, we're referring to constellations that circle around Polaris, which is our North Star, which is actually really far away from us. These are constellations, since the North Star is always in our sky, they're constellations that we can always see despite the time of year. Although their placement in the sky may change from month to month, we can still always see them. Some examples would be Ursa Major and Ursa Minor, otherwise known as the Big Dipper and the Little Dipper, one of which has the North Star in it. So the main point I want you to remember from circumpolar constellations is that we can always see them because we can always see the North Star. And these are constellations that circle around the North Star, even though their placement in the sky may change from month to month. And here's just a little picture to show you some of them. Here's the apparent motion. You can see here that's how they change from kind of month to month in their placement in the sky. Polaris pretty much stays the same. We circle around Polaris, which is our North Star. So these are constellations you always see. There it is. Polaris is in the Little Dipper. Here's our Big Dipper. Ursa Major. And then we have our seasonal constellations, which I kind of just named the summer and winter constellations. These are constellations that can only be seen during a certain time of year. Some examples are Orion and Vega, or Vega. And here's just an illustration to show you what can be seen in the summer and what can be seen in the winter. Here are all your summer constellations. There are all your winter constellations. And if you look up here, Polaris is still up there. And all the constellations that surround Polaris are pretty much all still the same. But then when you look down south, you see the differences. Here's Orion, the one I always talk about. Gemini is a big one. Libra. Notice a lot of them. Sagittarius are your signs.